Well, hello. Glad you can join me today for another class on telling yourself the truth. As fallen people, as children of the lie, we have a tendency to reject truth. We tell ourselves things that aren't really true. Romans 1:18 says, we suppress the truth in unrighteousness. We suppress it. In Romans 1:25, we exchange the truth of God for a lie. We tell ourselves things that just aren't true. And as a result, we end up in all kinds of problems. We ruin our lives. We ruin the lives of others. And God wants to restore our minds. He wants to restore us to our rightful thinking. Our thinking, our self-talk so easily distorts what's true and what's real. And it causes some problems. We've been looking at a formula, the ABC formula. The A in the formula is our circumstances, or maybe an event that's happened to us. And B, our self-talk, what we're thinking about that causes us, C, to respond. And C could be a behavior, it could be an emotion, it could be the way you feel about whatever it is. But you have this A, B, C formula, the scenario. Last week we looked at Abraham, and Abraham distorted truth in his mind. The A was his circumstance. He was moving into an area where there was a powerful king named Abimelech. And the B is what he was thinking. In Genesis chapter 20, verse 11, Abraham said, because I thought, this is what was going on in his mind, I thought surely there's no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. This is what he was thinking. His circumstances are, this is a powerful king. He's thinking, they're going to kill me. And the C is, he ended up lying about his wife. He said that she's my sister, and Abimelech took her into his harem, and it almost resulted in Abimelech's death. It could have resulted in things much worse. Abraham caused a real problem here, and it all began in his mind, the way he was thinking. And like Abraham, we all allow our self-talk to take control. Instead of doing what's right and trusting God, we have another scenario working in our minds. I want to look at another problem that we have with our self-talk, and it's a story we find in 2 Kings. 2 Kings, the 5th chapter, is this interesting story about a powerful man named Naaman. Naaman. 2 Kings chapter 5. It says, now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master, and highly respected because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. And the man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Here's a story about a guy who was successful. He had respect. He had control of everything in his life except one thing. He had leprosy. He was a captain of the army with leprosy. Somebody once asked me in a question and answer night, if we're supposed to quarantine if you have leprosy, how was it that Naaman was the captain of the army? It's a good question because he didn't quarantine himself. The reason he didn't quarantine himself is he didn't follow the law of Moses. He was a foreigner. He was a pagan. And yet God blessed this man. It said by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. And so here's this interesting fella. He had everything, but there's a problem. And it says in verse 2, now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel. And she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Aram said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 talents of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. But Naaman was furious. Here Naaman is, a leper. He hears about this prophet in Israel, in Samaria, and he goes to his master, the king, and the king decides to send him, and he sends him with all this silver and gold and clothes. All this would be a reward to anybody who could cure him of his leprosy. And he comes with this great entourage, his horses and chariots. You can just imagine this big motorcade with chariots and horses. And here's this great man, Naaman. And Elijah doesn't come out and save him at all. He sends a messenger and says, Well, go wash 7 times in the river Jordan. And he was furious. At the end of verse 12, it said he went into a rage. Have you ever lost your temper? Have you ever had a fit of rage? Have you ever flew off the handle? I mean, here is Naaman. He is mad. He is angry. He is in this fit of rage. Now, you have the situation, the A. We already painted the situation. Situation is, he's got leprosy. He hears that there's a prophet who can cure him. And then there's the C, this anger and rage. So what's the B? The B is in verse 11 and 12. Naaman was furious and went away and said, Behold, I thought. He would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. You notice why he was so upset? Because in his mind, he had painted a scenario. Here is what it's going to look like. He had this expectation of Elisha coming out and waving his hand over and doing this great thing. And he had this scenario, this self-talk. Well, the servants came to Naaman, spoke to him, and said, My father, had the prophet not told you some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he says to you, Wash and be clean? They reasoned with him, and his mind changed. He began to realize the foolishness of his thinking, and he calmed down, and he went and washed himself 7 times in the river Jordan, and of course he was cured. Have you ever been in a situation where you had this certain scenario painted, you had this certain expectation, how others must act, how others must speak, how others must respond? Sometimes we just need to open our minds to the truth and understand that our expectations will hardly ever be met. People will hardly ever behave the way we think because people are also often unkind, they're careless, they speak without thinking. Have you ever gotten upset like Naaman? Do you ever get upset when you drive? My wife tells me I'm an aggressive driver. I'm not an aggressive driver. I told her I'm just assertive. But I do get upset. Some things that upset me, I get upset at slow drivers, especially if they're in the left lane of the freeway. Move over. I got to get somewhere. I get upset with timid drivers. there's a place I go down 15th Street to McLaughlin, have to turn right. There's just a stop sign, and you got to turn right. And you get that timid driver in front of you who thinks that there has to be a half a mile of clear traffic before you can turn right. I think, get going, move on, come on, you can make it. There's no problem here. I get upset at people who cut you off in traffic, at reckless drivers. I get upset at drivers who can't find their turn signals. I don't like red lights that are too long. You see, our expectations are that we'll just have this smooth trip, that everybody will drive just like me, that I want them to go the speed I want them to go. I want them to do what I want them to do. I want no complications. And as a result, so often we become upset. We become angry. And what if we just change the way we think? That we decide to relax, that we decide not to be so competitive with the other drivers, that we can slow down, that we can expect some crazy drivers. My dad used to have a saying, a miss is as good as a mile. Well, he just meant if there was no accident, if there's no problem, why get upset? We get upset about things that haven't even happened in traffic so often. So if you just decide to relax and slow down, you might find that the trip took you 2 minutes longer, if that. It took you just a moment longer, but when you got home, you're relaxed, you're calm, you're ready to love your spouse and your kids. And you know what doesn't change is traffic. It's still the same mess out there. What you can change is the way you think about it. And so it's your thinking. That's what happened with Naaman. Naaman's thoughts took control. That's what happens to us. Our self-talk takes control. We have this misbelief about how people should behave themselves. We have all these shoulds. You know, they should do it my way, because that's the best way, and that's the right way to do things. They should be on time. They should do this, or they should do that, or they should say this, or they should say that. It's the shoulds that get us in problems. And we think it's just not fair. Fairness is a big problem with our anger. We get upset when we think things aren't fair. There's a story that Jesus told in Matthew, the 20th chapter. In Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the market. And he said to those, he said, go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. And they went. Again, he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour, he went and found others standing around. He said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last group first. When those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. When those hired first came, notice this, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, these men have worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, and who have borne the burden and the scorching heat of the day. But he answered and said to them, friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what's yours and go. But if I wish to give to the last man the same as you, it's not unlawful. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? They were upset. They got angry because they thought they had this scenario worked out in their mind. If the last one's hired got a denarius, oh, we're going to get paid so much more. It's as if Bill Gates went to a mall. Bill Gates goes to a mall up in Seattle and he finds 11 people and he gives each one of them $1 million. I'll tell you, someone will say that's just not fair. Well, why would it be unfair for him to do what he wants with that money? Why shouldn't he be generous with others? So often people think God is unfair. Not only is they think God unfair because things don't turn out the way they think they should, but sometimes things turn out the way they didn't want them to. A really good story about anger and the way a person thinks in this regard is the story of Jonah. You know the story of Jonah. He was told to go to Nineveh, and he went to Tarshish instead and ended up on a ship that was tossed by the sea, and he's thrown off the ship. He's swallowed by a fish. All this because he doesn't want to go to Nineveh. He doesn't want to preach to these people in Nineveh. He doesn't want them to come to repentance. He doesn't want God to be merciful to them. And finally, after all this calamity, he finally goes to Nineveh and preaches to them. And once you know it, those Ninevites responded in sackcloth and ashes, told God they were sorry. And in verse 4, here's what it says. But it greatly displeased Jonah, and he became angry. He was upset. He prayed to the Lord and said, please, Lord, was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish. For I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for death is better to me than life. He's mad enough to die. He is so angry that God would bless these people. And notice what the Lord said. Verse 4, do you have a good reason to be angry? Maybe we should ask ourselves that same question every time we get angry. Do you have a good reason to be angry? Haven't you painted the scenario in your mind? Isn't it this self-talk that's gotten you all worked up? He said Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself and sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. So the Lord appointed a plant. It grew up over Jonah to be shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort. And Jonah was extremely happy about the plant. But God appointed a worm. When dawn came the next day, it attacked the plant and it withered. When the sun came up, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he became faint and begged with all his soul to die, saying, death is better to me than life. Then God said to Jonah, do you have good reason to be angry about the plant? Jonah said, I have good reason to be angry, even to death. Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant for which you did not work and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? Jonah was angry because he thought that God should punish them no matter what. Thoughts that God's unfair. You see, we have to watch our self-talk. Our self-talk and all sorts of things about life. You know, there's a lot more than I could say about anger. Anger is not always a bad thing, actually. In Ephesians, Paul said, be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Be angry. It's okay to be upset, but don't sin. Don't say things you'll regret later. Don't do things you'll regret later. Be angry. It's an emotion. It's a response. But don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Take care of this. Don't brood about it. Don't go on. Don't let it make bitterness in your heart. Be angry, but do not sin. In James, the first chapter, James says this in verse 19. This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of God does not achieve the righteousness of God. Be slow to anger. Oh, anger is one of those complex issues in our life, and there's so much more I suppose we could say about it. But right now, I just want you to have the courage to tell yourself the truth about anger, that we want control. We want our expectations to be met. And we have the scenario built up in our mind. Be careful about your self-talk. We think, why do people always make me angry? Other people don't make you angry. You make yourself angry by your self-talk. Others will be unkind. They'll behave poorly. You can't control them. And so be like your Heavenly Father. Be compassionate. Be generous with your forgiveness. Just know that people are not going to meet your expectations. They're not going to play by your scenario. Love is slow to anger. Love is not easily provoked, it says in 1 Corinthians 13. So the lesson today is have the courage to tell yourself the truth about anger. Watch your self-talk. Well, I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you have a great week. God bless you.